Okay, great. Thanks everybody for coming. This is going to be a fun high-level talk. Hopefully fun. I'm going to have fun. That's what that's important too. This actually, I just want to. This is a Scala logo painted in watercolor by my girlfriend. So if anybody wants that to use for their talks or anything like that, just let me know and I can pass it on. So to kick things off, I actually want to start with a question to everybody here. I want everybody, it's a sort of existential question. What is the measurable value of Scala? Like if you were to pitch Scala to a customer, or you were to pitch Scala internally to your company, you're on a new project, how would you actually frame the value of Scala versus other alternate languages? And how would you position to measure that value? So I'm going to leave it there and just think about it as I talk. And so I'm going to open up with a little bit about my story. So I started exploring Scala in about 2008. I'm getting old. And I was working at the Bank of Montreal, and we were doing foreign exchange systems, wire transfer payment systems. Before that, I was actually a Java developer, and before that, I was a COBOL JCL developer. So I was evolving. I finally came to find Scala. And also a former Lightbank customer. So then I'll get into more details here, but before actually joining Lightbend as developer advocate, I was heavily using Scala and plain akka. And then finally, I started my own company about 6-7 months ago, and it's been going very well. And that's purely in part to the popularity of Scala. I think that we're seeing a major embrace of Scala in some enterprises that may have been a little more hesitant years ago. So what I've been up to for the last 5 years especially, how many people know the Red Book? Yeah, I'm from Toronto, Canada, and I was running a programming book club. And we were actually doing the Red Book to kind of to push our skills, and it was pretty amazing to see who was actually showing up at the Scala meetups. We had such a diverse crowd. There's actually one person that was still in high school that wanted to come out and push themselves in functional programming. People doing mainframe development, and then all the sort of more traditional Scala developers. We ran through that book in the book club twice, but we only got to chapter 7 each time. So I still have things to learn myself. And yeah, a little bit more about me. That's in the top right. That's me at a sales team meeting at Lightbend. I learned so much working there for about 2.5 years. That's me in British Columbia, visiting at a company who is wanting to chat about Scala and all things Scala. This is actually a cautionary tale. This is my co-founder at Red Elastic. So if you wonder what that is, that's actually us embarking on almost a 15-hour direct flight, but he keeps refusing to sign up for frequent flyer points, so he got put in economy, and I got bumped up to business class, but luckily there's a porthole, so I could kind of talk to him, tell him about how nice it was up in business class. So without further ado, I'll get into the meat of what we're going to talk about here. Disclaimer, this talk does not compile. This is an opinion. I actually encourage disagreement. That's actually the purpose of this talk, is to stimulate some discussion on some things that may be a tiny bit contentious. So first off, history. Value of anything is not static. As a developer advocate, you don't just get that job. You do that job, and then you're kind of found, and then you're more or less invited into the job. But what I've learned evangelizing and advocating Scala over the past 10 years is that the value changes, and it changes oftentimes relative to other offerings. It doesn't necessarily live in a bubble. So what you can see here is actually Scala as it has evolved alongside Java, and the two are very symbiotic, obviously. So I started Java development in 1999, 2000. I started with Java 1.16. So obviously, like, the value of Java 1.16 is going to be radically different than the value of Java 9. In turn, what I've learned is that the perceived value of more or less anything is directly proportional to the alternates, and also what's very familiar already. So let's start off where I kind of got to exploring Scala. This is what led me into Scala. So I was a very frustrated Java developer at the time. We were doing a lot of multi-core Java, and anybody that's struggled with threads, locks, monitors, things like that. When people sometimes talk about the complexity of Scala, I think back to how absolutely complex a lot of the Java code that I've done is in comparison. And so, yeah, I was working in capital markets. We were doing a lot of foreign exchange, wire transfers, things like this. Struggling also with clustered web logic. This also got me thinking not just Scala, but distribution. How do you distribute data? So distributed computing is actually quite easy without state, right? So add state to it, and it becomes exponentially harder. And so I was struggling with that. And so I needed a different concurrency model. I was actually, I was more or less stuck. I wanted to evolve the systems and couldn't find anything in Java that would help me. And so I just was wandering around a bookstore, just kind of like lonely and depressed in my multi-core Java nightmare. And I stumbled upon that book, and I like to draw and color and stuff on my free time. I noticed the crayons first, actually, and then, oh, wow, what's the Scala? Tackle multi-core complexity. How convenient that I found that. And so, yeah, I started to dive in pretty heavily, and this is the first thing I noticed is, oh my God, here is a language that is not only a JVM compatible language, but more or less night and day, more valuable than what I was doing in Java. Actually, I was still doing a lot of Java 1.4, so we weren't even using generics, Miles stuff, So contrast Miles against like Java pre-generics, and that was kind of my world at the time. So what really drew me was maybe not even the obvious, like putting on, show of hands, how many people consider themselves Java programmers as well, or started out as Java developers? Cool, so probably people with a very similar background to mine. I found immediate huge value in the REPL, so I'm not a test-driven developer. I've never been a test-driven developer. I refuse. I love tests, don't get me wrong, but I'm an exploratory-driven developer, and so having access to the REPL just made my life better. And then you add all the other things, the obvious things, like one of the things that I was struggling the most with, actually, it's the simplest of things. It's null pointer exceptions. So finding this magical thing that I later learned was something called a monad, called option, was transformative. And oh my God, I don't have to write getters and setters. That is crazy. Like we talk about, it's funny. Read the paper, watch the news, and they're talking about like AI is going to cause the end of the world, and meanwhile we're still sitting here writing getters and setters. So I think we have a little ways to go before the robots take over. And lambdas and pattern matching, all this great stuff, and pushing me into this new thing called functional programming. So it completely blew me away at the time, and it did not blow my company away at all. Actually, it had the opposite effect. It was not a honeymoon. There was no commercial support. There was no tools. There was no way for them to hire. My development manager looked at me like I had two heads, and that was the end of that. Just go figure out your null pointer exceptions and leave me alone. So the Java ecosystem was much more developed, especially in banking. I mean, there's things that were absolutely mandatory from a banking perspective, like static security analysis and automated code coverage and things like this. So, yeah, it was rejected. It didn't really even make it into a formal evaluation. But what is cool is now I'm actually being contacted by a lot of the developers that I was advocating Scala to back then. So it's pretty cool. But at the time, lack of commercial support, no tooling, no experienced developers, so case closed. And you'd figure that might be the end of, and it really was more or less the end of me playing around with Scala. I just went back to Java and made the best of it. So why attempt to use Scala again? So at the time, I was working for a different consulting company, and we had just got a new client, a fairly big client called Walmart, and we needed to build an advanced e-commerce platform more or less from the ground up, at least up to the back-end systems. And we had very few back-end developers, so we had some constraints. And so I was looking for alternates. I was, evaluating things like Gradle. I was evaluating Spring. There's a lot of Spring advocates in the agency. Somebody even pitched J2EE. That was fun. But I happened to go to QCon, and so I was struggling to find the right fit, and there's some. I'll get into some of the requirements of the project that were pretty challenging to meet. Sadek Droby gave a talk on play, and I was completely blown away. I had no idea what he was talking about. I mean, it was a talk about iterates and enumerates, and I have no idea what this is. But it was interesting enough that I actually downloaded Play during his talk. I realized this is maybe a little advanced for me. Downloaded Play, and actually the first few lines of code that are even live today were actually written towards the tail end of his talk. So if anybody gets bored, feel free to download things and hack and stuff like that. I won't I won't take offense. The other thing I want to point out here, a little off topic, is anybody that doesn't think conferences like this have an enormous value, that conference changed the direction of my career completely. It inspired me to find something new and to explore a new approach. And it was successful. I don't want to spoil the surprise at the end, but we wound up building that project out as a monolithic Play application and iterated over time and did the fancy things like microservices, but that was later. We just wanted to get the thing done as a monolith. So at the time, again, at least among developer mindshare, it was still an easy sell. Scala 2.9 was radically better than Java 7. It wasn't actually up until Java 8 that I would ever even recommend anybody to use the Lightbend tools with Java. So in the Java 7 days, and by the way, if you want to really understand the difference, if you haven't tried to say use Akka or Play with Java 7, go back to the historical versions of the documents, and most of the examples are in both Scala and Java, and you can compare the verbosity of the code. And it's just, verbose code, it's more than just ugly. I mean, it's a lot of things to pack into your head, so it's hard to reason about, hard to understand over time. And this is really so that's good, and that's good from a developer point of view, but when you're building out a project of that magnitude, that exposure, with that many stakeholders, it's not just a consulting company, but it's a client, not just a client, but a very big client. There's a lot of sort of checks that you have to tick off, and so a huge driver of the acceptance of Scala and Play and Akka was the fact that commercial support was available. So things were starting to come around. Now, I've got an X in the tooling and the hiring, so hiring, definitely, we could absolutely not find Scala developers. But what was curious is that we had job ads, and as soon as we mentioned that we're looking for top-tier developers and we're going to be working with Scala, we're willing to hire Java developers and train, the caliber of developer overnight, I was doing the job interviews, and the caliber of developer just went way up. So although there's some hiring constraints, they weren't insurmountable. If you're willing to invest, you can absolutely mitigate some of those constraints. The tooling, especially around things like static security analysis and just actually launching things into production, there's no Kubernetes and things like that. So and that's not just even specifically Scala, but the types of tools that were being used by the client were not supporting Scala at all. So it didn't block it though. So that was fantastic from a developer point of view. Commercial support was available. What was interesting is technical leadership, both at my company that I was working for and at the client actually approved plain ACA before even really diving deep into discussing Scala. So I just thought it was interesting. Language was actually the very last decision made. And it was viewed as a developer concern. So they definitely held us to task, and they asked us if we could meet these deadlines and do it with few people. So they're gauging, is this strategic? Like leadership at the VP or the C-suite level, they're not programmers, they're not developers. That's not their wheelhouse. So they wanted to map it. They essentially wanted to map it into their strategy. So it supports a JVM, and it sounds good. But more or less, what they were doing is they're gauging our developer happiness, and everybody was so pumped they couldn't ignore it. So it was approved. But we measured everything. That was a project where more or less every kind of metric had to be measured, from load testing to stress testing to pretty much everything. And so the benefits of Scala with plain ACA were measurable. We were also using, how many people have ever heard of a product called Endeca? Nobody, no e-commerce developers. Endeca it's a very, very fast data store that's used for things like type-ahead search, and so you're not doing complex queries at runtime. It's basically just all completely denormalized, and it's meant to run on very exotic hardware and be very fast. And we were actually able to cause Endeca problems before play at 5 million page views per minute, which is more or less the baseline kind of metric that we had to meet. On top of that, the site, there's no static routes on the entire site. Everything is actually, all the pages are actually built by the business offline and pushed to the site. So that's including dynamic lookups of whether this URI is valid or invalid, and if it's a URI, get all the JSON and render it as HTML and cache it and do all of these things. So yeah, it was pretty intense. And they also wanted zero downtime, obviously, so who doesn't? And we were able to prove it. Again, we were able to measure it and prove it. What happens if we pull down half of the cluster of play servers? So a very small Scala team delivered that initial build in under 12 months. And what was interesting is the effort actually on the front end was radically greater. The amount of code that we produced was radically smaller in the back end, even though it was doing quite complex things. And that's just a testament to the power of functional programming and the fact that the abstractions are, each one of them, small enough to sort of fit in your head. Like, the way that I started really understanding the values. First off, code is read much more than it's written. And if you have one line of code that's just well understood, a fold is a fold, a map is a map, and it's from language to language, you can pack that into your head very easily when you look at code. And so then I had to do code reviews on the front end, and it was just it was, a big context switch back and forth, but really made me appreciate the abstractions. So jump ahead to 2014. I went to work at Lightbend as their developer advocate, and a big part of that job was doing events like this, speaking, also meeting with clients, prospective clients. So I've met with hundreds of businesses since 2014, and had a lot of conversations to the value of Scala and how people are feeling about Scala, and how it's perceived, not just in the developer community, but at all levels of an organization. But what's interesting is over time, the conversations, a lot of the time, especially in larger enterprises, they always come back to Java. It's like, what is the value proposition of this language in relation to what we're already using and what we already have momentum with? So you're seeing things like, Java is actually borrowing a lot of, it's being heavily influenced by Scala, which I think is great. I mean, it's bringing these concepts to huge numbers of developers, which is only good for everybody in this room. And so there's like a convergence of language features themselves, and there's also this sort of convergence of ecosystem where you're starting to see much more, more and more improvements into the ecosystem. For everything from monitoring. So when I started trying to launch a Playaka Scala project, finding sort of off-the-shelf monitoring was very difficult. Now you have things like ops clarity. So you're seeing over the 2.5 years that I worked at Lightbend, I saw a big change in the ecosystem, which was actually driving both Java and Scala deeper into enterprises, which is great. So there's sort of a lot of momentum that I saw. It was actually, being on the ground. I mean, a big part of my job was getting in a rental car with a sales rep and driving around for 2 weeks and doing meetings. So you get to really feel what's happening on the ground and in the community. And at the beginning of 2014, tooling was still emerging, but it's been maturing steadily. And now at the time when we were pitching the stack to Walmart, I mean, Walmart wasn't a case study, right? I mean, it's chicken before the egg, and there weren't some of the big case studies that a company of that size is looking for. Now we have success stories from a number of large companies. So it's kind of gone from this underdog language used by advanced developers who are sort of at the edge to, I know the word enterprise is bad, right? Let's call it maturity, right? I mean, these are mature businesses with a large number of developers. But now it's completely realistic, and I've seen it happen to build a complete top-to-bottom enterprise platform using Scala and the related tools. And so that was 2.5 years of meeting with people and talking about the technology and just noticing the radical change in how mature Scala is getting. And now, so fast forward to today, right now, is we're noticing even more of a convergence in sort of not type level Scala, stock Scala, let's call it stock Scala. Yeah, now even Java, how many people here ever thought Java would get a REPL? How many people thought that Java would start to embrace functional programming? So absolutely, you can start to do, after Java 7, I was actually in some cases recommending Java to Lightbend customers, and I would recommend it for a lot of different reasons. Say one reason would be very large company with very large team, and especially a large team of contractors that were brought in on site. So they've got momentum, they've got skills, and maybe a customer doesn't want to train on a new language. But with Java 8 and 9, Java 8, Java 9's not out yet, but with Java 8, you could do a lot of things. Maybe not as elegantly, you still probably had to write a getter and a setter, but you could actually start to use functional collections and things like this. Now in Java, I mean, there's libraries like Java Slang. How many people here have played around with Java Slang? Yeah, it's very cool. So now you're seeing even sort of more possibility of doing functional style programming in Java. So yeah, the REPL JShell, there's some advancements in HTTP with a new client and things like this. Real immutable collections, so in Java 9 you're going to have, if you try to put something, it's actually going to throw things like unsupported operations, so true immutable collections. And reactive streams, so there's going to be new reactive streams interfaces within Java 9. Actually, on a different note, the module system was just rejected too. So the modularity, yeah, Scala is going to have an edge in modularity with 2.13. It's still going to be winning. But yeah, what's interesting is because I started out as a Java developer, I still enjoy Java. I love Scala. I like Java. But I like seeing this sort of thing more and more. And I'm very surprised at how far the entire community is coming together. So a better Java is good for Scala, I feel. 2.12 was more or less a compiler release. So at the end of the day, anybody that's working on compilers is also a Java developer, and a very advanced one at that. So you're seeing features within the language that are making their jobs easier. And the ecosystem is catching up. There's going to be a talk from the triple quote guys today. So even like compilation speeds are going to get faster with Hydra. Now there's SAST support with Scala with HP Fortify. So there's just a tremendous convergence of features on both sides. But so value needs context, and so I've kind of touched on this, but I would argue that developers are very concerned about productivity and syntax and things like this. Managers have to pay attention to the logistics. A manager's job and an executive's job, it's not actually to do the work, it's to increase the capacity of their team to do the work, right? So when you're trying to map value, those are the types of conversations that you're going to have, is how does Scala help my team to increase its productivity? So saying something like, well, it's very hard to find Scala developers, that's actually the opposite. So it's important when you're thinking about the value of Scala to also think about, especially if you're adopting it, is what are you going to give back to the community in terms of training new developers? And I had a tremendous amount of luck with training Scala developers, and I had a lot of help. We actually had hired somebody that was a functional programming lecturer out of the University of Calgary to be, or sort of like FP ringer, so I'd also highly recommend having a ringer. How many people are not using Scala in their day jobs, but thinking about it? So there are definitely a handful of people, yeah. So feel free afterwards to come chat with me if you want any more context. But in this case, I feel like syntax is more or less not at the executive level, but it is if you're able to map it to their strategy. And you are definitely able to do that. I was able, I watched it happen with at the previous consulting company I was working for, so it's absolutely possible. So competing on syntax alone, I feel is a race to the bottom. Like Scala must compete and thrive on value. So I'm going to run through some of the common objections that I've heard. This is the fun sort of like war story stuff that the reason I decided to do this talk is because, you know, when I talk to people about the community and meeting so many people, a lot of the times they want to hear about things like this. And there's a reason. So I don't know how many people have read the book 0 to 1, but this is one of my favorite quotes out of it. The end of this quote is that Charles Manson and Jim Jones did not make good exits. So you want to avoid being sort of totally dedicated. It's often good to look at things objectively. So understanding the objections, it's not negative, and it's absolutely not that they're even valid, but it's very helpful to understand them so you can understand how to position. So this is probably one of the most common objections that I've heard from executives, is that they absolutely don't care about language. So to me, what I hear when I hear this is that I've not yet mapped Scala to their strategy. The ROI, what's the ROI of Scala? I'm going to ask some people after my talk when we're drinking coffees. I'm just going to come up, what is the ROI of Scala? So get ready. No, I'm joking. But measuring the return on investment, like if you're to pitch this and push it through an org, it's actually sometimes hard to quantify. So that's a common objection. Scala is not being approved by our enterprise architect team. I don't even know what that one is. I just threw it in there. I hear it a lot. Basically, to be serious, when I hear that, is I actually hear that there might be some organizational challenges, right? There could be a team that is sort of like dictating tech decisions down, which is really bad, because in organizations like that, you say become like the best COBOL developer, and then you get anointed onto this tech selection committee, and then 15 years goes by, you're still on there, and you haven't coded since, and you're making architectural decisions. So that's a tough one. You're getting a little more into corporate politics. Objection handling. These are all things that I've had very long chats with and gone through the back and forth. So using Scala really does open up hiring opportunities. I've personally been through this. This is the most important. This where I truly believe to my core that Scala is on the right side of history, is that we are going to very quickly move away from these big 150-person development teams and move to very skilled, very small teams. More like, does anybody here play Dungeons & Dragons? Don't leave me as the only nerd. Yes, okay, I'm with my people. I feel safe and warm now. Honestly, I feel like with Scala, so not only did we adopt Scala on our team, but we actually had a weekly D&D game. We had a one-year campaign, and I found that our development was very similar to D&D, where we had one person who's like an FP wizard and one person who's this and that, but everybody has a place on a small Scala team. Everybody has a specialization. There's no hiding in the sort of like cruft of 100 people. And I feel like programming professionally is going to go more and more, really double down on small team sizes. And Scala is absolutely the language of choice in strategic domains, and I'll talk more about what those domains are. Development manager objections. And these ones are fun. Scala is difficult and only for the elite. How many people have heard this one? Yeah, somebody has. I'm not going to let no hands raised on that one. Yeah, okay. Scala is difficult, but why? It's not. I find a giant for loop much more complex to cram into my head than a sort of one-liner functional statement like a fold or reduce. It's not that it's difficult, it's that it's unfamiliar. So what I hear in those cases is that perhaps we need to have conversations about how do you train and how do you invest in your people. So there are not enough, this is basically hand in hand, there's not enough Scala developers in the market. Well, it's back to Scala developers aren't born, you're not just like, maybe Miles, where you were just out of the womb as a Scala developer, but the rest of us had to learn it, and we learned it on the job. So I think that there's a case to be made for investing, especially if your developers are looking to push their skills in very strategic ways. And Scala doesn't have support for this, that, and the other thing. Used to be true, not so much anymore. So here's a real objection handling statement that is very true for me. Also very true. I mean, it's a JVM language. It's very interoperable with more or less every Java library. If you're scared to just go all in, you can definitely accomplish more in Scala with fewer developers, and the developers tend to be very engaged and interested, so they're just more productive. It's not sometimes it's not even a specific language thing. It's just an interest and excitement that developers that want to learn new things and push themselves bring to the table in a company. And so you'll unlock the potential of your people. This is us, Perl for life. How many other Perl developers here? Don't leave me hanging. Nobody. One of my favorite quotes in security is like, "What's the best security analysis tool?" And somebody says Perl. So, so developer objections. Yeah, this happens. Hey, we don't know any of this stuff. Category theory, all of these things, calculus, linear algebra. Neither do I. It's fine. You can work with the Scala that. So there's a principle called the principle of least power, and I would advocate you basically living and breathing the principle of least power on any project, including a Scala project. Functional programming is terrifying. We'll get into that, but it's absolutely not terrifying. It's just new and unfamiliar. Scala is very unopinionated. This is actually true. Scala is very unopinionated. That was one of the hardest things, is just writing like a best practices guide for teams. I don't have time to learn a new language. Well, then you don't have time to be a professional programmer, because you have to learn new things. It just is what it is. We're in the fastest changing profession in human history. So if you ever hear, I don't have time to learn something new, then maybe advocate, it's not law or accounting or anything that just stays static, and you can open up the tome from the 1800s. I mean, this changes every day. We need to sell books. Yeah, so you don't need that. You can learn it if you would like. When I first became very vocal in the Scala scene, people were, I was like, you don't need to know higher kind of types. And I was taken to task. Well, you should learn them. I don't need them. Show me a use case and I will use them. I will be happy to. I still haven't found a use case where I needed them. So, but I'm willing to be convinced if anybody can do it. And yeah, stretching yourself. Like myself personally, my skill set as a developer, who cares what my title is right now? I love to code. I will code until I stop breathing. And functional programming is the thing that, so going from COBOL and JCL to Java was a transition. That was one thing. I didn't find that as pleasurable because, I'm not even going to go into that. I could digress for a long time. But yeah, and it's very strategic for your career. So I would also think about, how do you help people with their career? Where is the industry going, and is functional programming a part of it? So value. Scala is very active. I mean, we're here today, right? That's proof. There's significant contributions by partners. Type level, Lightbend. It's averaging 2 releases per year. It's in the top tier of languages now. Let's see. Okay, I got one zoomed in. So you can see that Scala has overtaken PowerShell for victory. So we are well on the way. We're gonna. I feel confident we're gonna be right up there. I feel it. If we can beat PowerShell, we can do anything. Companies driving growth. This is huge. Major companies want to see other major companies. Like, if you're telling somebody, hey, skateboarding without wheels is fun. Somebody wants to see you do it first, right? Because that sounds unfamiliar. Apple, I just did this before I came to the conference. 50 to 80 open Scala positions at any given time, 73 right now. So obviously there's a big push inside Apple with Scala. Coursera, this is actually how I really first started learning. On the Walmart project, we basically ran through all of Martin's curriculum together twice. And so now there's an entire specialization available, which is amazing. IBM's Big Data University. How many people have heard of this? This is a pretty big investment. So IBM is investing. So there's a lot. I could go on and on about this, but there's some very strategic investments happening into Scala. So the future of Scala, I think it's very, very well positioned in things like cloud computing, all the data, big and fast, fast and fast. But especially fast data. Where I think that especially like right now where I hear a lot of people going is, one of the things that we did in capital markets a lot is complex event processing. So some of the things that are possible now with fast data, for instance, in foreign exchange, when you're dealing with, say, 60 rate updates a second sometimes is amazing. So I'm actually looking forward to the next talk as well. And modern architectures. I think that Scala is very well positioned just because there's simply less code that you have to write. Tons of tools leading the charge. I won't go through each of them, but you can see that there's, especially with reactive streams becoming a very emerging standard, is very exciting. So I'm going to wrap this up. I'm going to wrap it up that Scala is not the next Java. I don't think it is going to become the next Java. I don't think it should become the next Java. I think that Scala's place is to move us forward as programmers and as an industry. I think enterprises will continue to embrace Java, given the closing gap in language features. So again, it's about where does Scala go next. But enterprises, and I've seen this, it's absolutely true. Enterprises will use Scala much more readily now than they would. But both languages and ecosystems, at the end of the day, they're JVM languages, so they will exist and thrive together. Scala is the next Scala. So this is how we tie into the fancy slide, the first slide. I believe that Scala must retain the first mover advantage. How many people have heard the first mover advantage, the last mover advantage? Yeah, so really it's really about where you sort of gain your advantages. I think that Scala its DNA is to be first in things like type systems and in things like functional programming. But Java is going to continue to be inspired by Scala. And I think that Scala is going to push, when we get outside of languages. I live in Toronto. There's a ton of Scala happening, even at the University of Toronto, which is right up the street from our office. They've hosted reactive programming talks that I run a group called Reactive Toronto. They have a continuing education program in big data with Scala as a language. So it's huge. And so I think that Scala is going to continue to unlock the full potential, and I know it has unlocked a lot of potential that I had. So in summary, value is always in flux. Being the next something is not aspirational. Java is going to remain a popular choice, but I feel that Scala is the optimal choice for mission-critical projects in strategic domains with small teams and modular architectures. So we're definitely shouldn't be aiming at volume. I think that what I've gained from Italy, this is the first time I'm here, is that it's not about the volume of food. It's about the quality. Thank you.